Good morning, my friends. Today, it's a gray day, just gray. I don't even know if it's cold outside. It's just kind of gray and whatever. So, overall, it's probably nicer, which means it's probably warmer out today, which I'm pretty happy about. It's been very cold lately. Just going outside to do very basic activities has sort of been quite challenging, even with my long john get up that I have going on. So today it's Friday, as you all know, and I'm doing another book review. And today I have a book here. Let me just grab it for you, which is Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis. Some of you might know Michael Lewis as the guy who wrote The Big Short. He also wrote Moneyball. And so he's a very famous, I guess he's considered an economist or just a guy who likes to talk about the financial markets. And Liar's Poker is actually his personal story of working at Salomon Brothers during the 1980s when the bond market was just sort of like exploding in terms of popularity. And he sort of accounts his experience working there. He accounts the stories of the New York mortgage bond department at Salomon's, which was like the biggest section of that firm at the time. And so if you really want a realistic portrayal of what life is like on Wall Street, definitely get this book. You're not going to get it from something like American Psycho, which is fiction. This is a real life account. And it's also interesting because you see the stories, you see all the different kinds of characters and the breadth of personalities that existed in that kind of environment. He sort of talks about his own transformation from sort of being a naive sort of kid just coming out of school and then starting to get a job at Salomon Brothers, and then sort of transitioning into this very money hungry, angry person who's constantly working and unsatisfied with basic things. You definitely see the greed that exists in this environment to its fullest degree, but also just the way that these people operate was very sort of based around getting a bonus, right? That was the main thing that people who worked for these places wanted. It was very much a meritocracy in terms of how Wall Street was operated. And a lot of these smaller firms could never really compete because even if they had really solid employees, they would usually just get bought out by the bigger firms next to them, like Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. All these guys pretty much would buy out any good trader or salesman that worked for them. This is also a good book to learn a little bit about the bond market and junk bonds, junk bonds were more popular during the 90s. But overall, it's a really good book because it's, really it's like a really funny book in a lot of ways. The characters that you sort of see and the sort of individuality that is sort of present inside of it. It's something that you can't really recreate that well in a fictional novel because it's done realistically. These aren't, a fictionalized account of Wall Street and, these very overplayed, like super greedy, one-dimensional characters. These are real people, and some of them are good, some of them are bad. Some of them are more greedy, some of them are assholes, some of them are very relaxed and uplifting, and he often gives a lot of accounts of people who would basically, if you started working there, you would be like an apprentice, I think it was called a nerd or a dork when you first started out, and they would basically just treat you like shit. It was like a fraternity house, really. and there were some few women who were able to work there, and there was obviously a lot of sexual harassment, and sort of emphasizes the sort of moral strength, not moral strength, but the spiritual, or whatever you want to call it, the mental strength that a woman had to go through during that time to sort of be able to work in that kind of environment, because it was a very testosterone filled environment, obviously. And you see how, like, some of the people, while there was a lot of greed and a lot of, proposed selfishness, he often accounts of these moments when, people sort of rose up in the office. One of the biggest traders in the mortgage bond department, which was Louis Ranieri, who was very well known at the time. And he originally worked in the mail room, right? He was working like a minimum wage job, came out of the Bronx, I think, and was married. And his wife was in the hospital, actually, and he was struggling to pay her bills. And one of the guys from, I think at the time was the equities department, when that was more popular, decided to pay for his wife's hospital bill just because he felt like it, right? And then eventually Ranieri started working on the trading floor, and eventually became one of the top earners in the mortgage bond department, which is really interesting to see that kind of story. And then we see it sort of change in how these people, they, instead of just, because they used to have a very distinct style, they used to be very unorthodox. They used to just be a bunch of guys just trying to make some money, and they were doing it the best way possible. Usually they were one of the best firms at the time, and they were one of the most unorthodox. And eventually Solomon Brothers became more and more like a Merrill Lynch and a Morgan Stanley, just a normal, typical corporation that didn't have a sense of identity and personality. And he emphasizes that a lot. And one of the main things is how he sort of acts upon, selling. He was a salesman, right? His main work was in London, I believe, or it was in London. And he often accounts a lot about his guilt towards selling investors bad investments, not on purpose, obviously, but just sometimes it would happen, and he would sell them certain things. He sort of acted like a broker, I guess, in that sense. And then a lot of these investors would lose all their money and like curse him out, and he would get a large commission from that, and eventually would be rewarded from that by the firm later on. So it's interesting to see there's this more moral dynamic that comes with managing other people's money, that even though if you fail, you can still get rewarded in the end, which is kind of interesting of what was happening. But yeah, it was obviously all of this stuff, that sort of, that the massive greed, the bluffing, the lying that sort of came in this moment of time, and Wall Street eventually crumbled before them, which was the 1987 crash, and a lot of those firms sort of went under because of that. And that was sort of very interesting to sort of read about, to sort of see it from a real perspective, because a lot of the times we'll see it in a movie or in a fictional account. The most common one is like The Wolf of Wall Street, which a lot of people have obviously read or watched, not read, which is also a true story, but it doesn't give you the concept of what a trading floor really is, or what traders and people who are selling bonds and buying bonds. It was very much more focused on the salesman tactics, which is what Michael Lewis was doing at that time, which isn't really, when we're looking at Wall Street from a holistic perspective, there's the selling tactics and selling bad investments to people is very much only one aspect of that market. So anyway, that's all I really have to say. It's a really good book. I'll definitely check it out. It's yeah, you'll definitely enjoy it. It's quite humorous to read, so you'll get a good laugh if you read it. So anyway, that's all I have to say, and I hope you have a wonderful day.